Hi everyone, so a brief thing, hopefully, about an evolution that happened in British military swords around the year 1845. So, in 1821, 1822, three new models of sword were brought into the British military, a light cavalry sabre, a heavy cavalry sabre, and a infantry officer's sabre. And in actual fact, the light cavalry and the heavy cavalry both had troopers' versions and officers' versions. And the thing that I really want to talk about is that in 1821/22, the blade that came with the officers' versions, that is the 1821 pattern light cavalry officer's sword, the 1821 pattern heavy cavalry officer's sword, and the 1822 pattern infantry officer's sword, all had what we call a pipe back blade. So here I have one. This is actually a fairly unusual one in that it's not technically an officer's sword, it's actually a sergeant's sword, which is quite rare. It's actually marked with the sergeant's name on, so that's how we know it's a sergeant's sword. But in form, this is actually exactly the same as the officer's sword, so I'm using it to demonstrate. So, the pipe back blade, what is it? Well, it's what it sounds like. Along the back of the blade is a pipe section, that is a rod section. So we essentially have a round section at the back, and then the flat section coming out from that makes the rest of the blade. So, rod or circular section along the back, and then a fairly flat blade coming to an edge for the rest of it here. And what's good about a pipe back blade is you get, for the size of the blade, you get a very light blade. These pipe back blades are really nimble, really light, really quick for their length and for their width. So this is a big blade actually. It's 35.5 inches long by 1¼ inches wide. Pretty big sword, but it's really light. It's this one's a little bit under 2 pounds. Very light sword for its size. And additionally, the other good thing about a pipe back blade is you have a rod section at the back, so all of the strength and the thickness is at the back of the blade, and the rest of the blade is quite thin and flat. So that means you have quite a fine edge, which can be very finely sharpened, give you a very sharp cutting edge, and very little resistance directly behind it because the rest of the blade is quite thin. Disadvantages. Well, as John Latham said in 1862, and various other people during the 19th century also commented on, including Colonel Mary as well, is the problem is that if you're cutting through something, you have this nice sharp edge and a nice flat section, but then you meet the resistance of this rod at the back. So as you're cutting through something, you get to a certain depth, and then of course encounter a lot of resistance as it meets the back of the blade. So, not fantastic actually for giving deep wounds, deep cuts, or cutting through things like someone's wrist or fingers. But in other words, giving deep cuts, but very good at giving superficial light surface cuts. The other disadvantage to the pipe back blade is this. They are very bendy, okay? And in the Crimean War, and particularly in the charge of the Light Brigade and the charge of the Heavy Brigade, which happened at the Battle of Balaclava in 1854, the Russians wore heavy woolen greatcoats, and there are many accounts of British cavalrymen, officers in this case, using their pipe back blades and them flexing and not penetrating the opponent's clothes. And this is noted in India as well. So pipe back blades were not very good for thrusting because they were too flexible, essentially, not stiff enough. So not fantastic at cutting, not fantastic at thrusting. You might think, why did they use them? Well, the design had been brought about in the late Napoleonic period, probably about 1805, 1810. These pipe back blades became really popular. And in fact they were used also on naval officers' swords from up until 1845 again. Okay, so essentially it was, I guess it was partly fashion. They'd been invented supposedly by the sword maker Prosser, a London sword maker, sword designer, shall we say, in conjunction with other people. And there was a period of time between about, say, 1810 and kind of 1845, in fact, where the pipe-back blade was used quite a lot on officers' swords and seen as quite good, but there was a lot of criticism aimed at it. This eventually gained momentum such that by 1845 there was enough opposition to the pipe-back blade as a design to actually come out with a new design of blade, which we'll look at now. Okay. I should also mention that beyond 1845 the pipe-back blade was retained in a few Indian cavalry regiments, and we don't really know why, but presumably they thought that it gave a very fine cutting edge perhaps, so it did have some survival after 45. But in 1845 a new type of blade came in that has become known as the Wilkinson style of blade. That's not to say that they're all made by the Wilkinson Sword Company, because they were not. However, Wilkinson, Henry Wilkinson, that is, seems to have pioneered the particular design that was then used on officers' swords after 1845. And this applied to both types of cavalry, infantry officers and Royal Navy officers, and also artillery officers, basically all officers' swords. And the type of blade shown here, how does it differ? Well, so what we've got is actually a blade which is more similar to things which had gone before. You have a fuller up here, that is a groove, which gives it structural strength with lightness as well. And then single edge all the way along the front, just like the pipe-back sword, and a false edge for about 8 inches of the back, just like the pipe-back. The difference being that the last sort of 8 to 10 inches of the point are what we call spear pointed. That is, it is double-edged with a ridge running up the centre, and the point is located in the middle. Most pipe-back blades, the point is located at the back. Having the point in the middle means that when you're thrusting into a target, the sword remains straight going into the person's body or into whatever you're thrusting. When the point's at the back, you naturally get a push at the back of the sword off to the side. So it's better to have a spear point blade for thrusting. Equally, the blade is stiffer than the pipe-back blade. Okay? Also, the edge is more robust because it has more metal behind it at the actual cutting edge. Debatably, you could say it's not such a fine edge, but you can sharpen this very adequately, and you've got a more robust edge, so it's better at cutting, also because it's a stiffer blade, which also assists cutting. Because it's a stiffer blade, it's better at thrusting, and because it has the spear-pointed blade, it's also better at thrusting. So essentially, I would argue, and they clearly thought so as well, the 1845 style blade, pioneered by Henry Wilkinson and known as the Wilkinson type blade, which was then used right the way through to the end of the century, is a better combat blade, and they tend to be heavier as well. They're heavier, chunkier blades, and they're far better equipped for dealing with opponents who are using maybe tulwars or heavy cascara or other types of quite heavy swords, or bayonets even. And the hilts essentially stayed the same on all of the models of sword that I've mentioned. So there we go, 1845 in British swords was an important date because we changed, in officers' swords, we changed from pipe-back blades to fullered blades. Thank you.